In 2006, the world's most powerful design software was a nightmare. If you wanted to create a simple flyer, you needed years of training or $1,000 for a professional designer. Then, a college student with zero industry experience decided to crush the professional designer. 20 years later, her company is worth $40 billion. But the most insane part of this story isn't the money. It's the fact that Canva was built on a lie that the entire tech industry believed was impossible. To understand how they did it, we have to go back to a living room in Perth, Australia. Melanie Perkins wasn't a tech titan or a coding prodigy. She was a 19-year-old girl teaching people how to use InDesign and Photoshop. She watched her students struggle for hours just to perform the simplest tasks. The software was clunky, expensive, and frankly, it felt like it was built for a different century. Melanie realized something that the giants at Adobe completely missed. The future of design wasn't about more features. It was about less friction. She imagined a world where anyone could create something beautiful without ever talking to a designer. Market experts at the time thought she was delusional. Design was seen as a sacred craft that required elite skills and high-end hardware. The idea of design for everyone sounded like a recipe for ugly posters and broken brands. But Melanie saw a gap that was about to become a canyon. The internet was becoming visual, yet the tools to create that vision were still locked behind a paywall of complexity. She started with something small, school yearbooks. It was a niche market, but it proved her thesis. If you give people the right building blocks, they don't need a degree to be creative. However, taking that tiny success and turning it into a global empire required a gamble that nearly ended the company before it started. If you're finding value in how these massive companies are built from scratch, you'll probably fit right in with our community. We break down the quiet moves that change industries every week. Join us by hitting subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. When Melanie and her co-founder Cliff Obrecht went to Silicon Valley, they were outsiders in every sense. They weren't from Stanford, they weren't from Google, and they were pitching a design killer to investors who use designers for everything. Over 3 years, Melanie heard the word no more than 100 times. Investors told her the market was too small. They told her Adobe would crush her in a weekend. They told her she needed a real tech team. What they didn't see was that Melanie wasn't building a tool. She was building an ecosystem. She finally landed a meeting with Bill Tai, a legendary investor. But there was a catch. He wouldn't look at her pitch unless she learned how to kiteboard. It sounds ridiculous, but it was a test of grit. She spent months falling into the ocean just to earn a few minutes of his time. That persistence eventually led to a seed round. But the real challenge was just beginning. They had the money, but they were about to enter a war with the most dominant software company on the planet. By 2012, Canva was ready to launch to the public, but the insiders were worried. The tech world believed that free software was for hobbyists, not businesses. They thought professional designers would lead a boycott against any tool that dumbed down their craft. Outsiders, on the other hand, thought Canva was just another photo editor like Instagram. Neither side realized what was actually happening behind the scenes. Canva wasn't just letting you move images around. They were building a massive library of preset templates. This was the secret weapon. Instead of a blank canvas, which is the most terrifying thing for a non-designer, they gave you a finished product that you just had to tweak. They were selling the end result, not the process. This moment locked Canva into a path that was incredibly dangerous. They were essentially betting that the average user was more valuable than the professional user. If they were wrong, they would burn through their cash and disappear into the graveyard of forgotten startups. The tension was at a breaking point. Would people actually pay for something that looked so simple? The strategy was brilliant because it relied on a psychological trick. Canva made people feel talented. When a small business owner created a Facebook banner in 5 minutes that looked professional, they didn't just keep it to themselves. They told everyone. Canva didn't spend millions on traditional advertising. They built a product that advertised itself. Every time someone shared a design, the logic was simple: make the user the hero. This looked smart, but it relied on one massive assumption. They assumed that copyright and licensing wouldn't become a legal nightmare. They were providing millions of images and fonts. Managing those rights at scale was a mountain of complexity that should have failed. But they automated the licensing process so deeply that it became a revenue stream instead of a cost. Every time a user paid $1 for a premium element, Canva took a cut and paid the creator. It was a perfect loop. But as the company grew to millions of users, a new problem emerged. The very designers they were trying to replace started to get angry. Very angry. Let's talk about the growth, because the numbers are staggering. In its first year, Canva reached 750,000 users. By 2021, they were at 60 million. But here is what most people don't understand about their valuation. Canva reached a $40 billion valuation while remaining profitable. In the world of tech startups, being profitable is almost unheard of during a hypergrowth phase. Investors kept saying yes because Canva's customer acquisition cost was nearly zero. People were joining the platform because they had to. If your boss sent you a Canva link to edit a presentation, you had to make an account. It was the same network effect that built Microsoft Word and Slack. However, as the valuation climbed, the pressure shifted. They weren't just a cool tool anymore. They were a threat to the entire creative economy. The hidden loss wasn't in the bank account. It was in the reputation. The pro community started labeling Canva as the death of design. The tension between being a simple tool and a serious platform began to pull the company apart. Here is the uncomfortable truth that no one in the design world wants to admit. Canva didn't succeed because it was better than Photoshop. It succeeded because most people don't actually need Photoshop. They need a result, and they need it now. The belief that quality requires difficulty collapsed. The psychological moment happened when massive corporations started ditching their expensive design agencies for internal teams using Canva. It proved that good enough is often better than perfect if perfect takes 3 weeks and costs $5,000. The reality is that Canva didn't kill the designer. It killed the designer's monopoly on visual communication. This brings up a massive question for the future of work. If an AI-driven tool can do 90% of a professional's job for $10 a month, what happens to the professional? I'm curious to hear your take on this. Is Canva a tool that empowers creativity, or is it just making everything look the same? Drop a comment below. I really want to see where you stand on this. There are a few powerful lessons here that apply to any business. First, focus on the friction, not the features. Melanie Perkins didn't look for what was missing. She looked for what was annoying. Smart people often miss this because they are too focused on adding complexity to show off their intelligence. Second, your niche is your springboard. Canva didn't try to be everything for everyone on day one. They mastered school yearbooks, then social media posts, then presentations. They earned the right to expand. Third, democratizing a skill is the fastest way to build a billion-dollar brand. Whether it's design, coding, or finance, if you can take something hard and make it easy, the world will beat a path to your door. These ideas apply far beyond just graphic design. They are the blueprint for the next decade of software. Canva's journey from a rejected pitch to a $40 billion powerhouse is proof that being an outsider is often your greatest advantage. You see the flaws that the experts have learned to ignore. If you enjoy real business stories that go beyond the surface, you might want to subscribe. We're currently working on a breakdown of how another simple tool is quietly taking over the enterprise world. You won't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.